Good morning, and thank you once again for tuning into Daily Bible Canada. I'm so excited to continue on our path of the Corinthians, where we're learning about the Corinth church and how the Corinthian Christians did very horrible things that Paul doesn't agree with, pretty much. And he's telling us why he doesn't agree with these decisions that they made. So moving on into chapter 7, now our topic for today is marriage. And we're actually going to work our way through this, but we're going to start by reading verses 1 through 16. But don't worry, we will go back like we normally do and work verse through verse to find out what God's trying to tell us, or what the message that Paul's relaying to us here is. So verse 1 says, "Now concerning the things whereof ye wrote unto me, it is good for a man not to touch a woman." Verse 2, "Nevertheless, to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife, and let every woman have her own husband." Verse 3, "Let the husband render unto the wife due benevolence, and likewise also the wife unto the husband." Verse 4, "The wife hath not power of her own body, but the husband, and likewise also the husband hath not power of his own body, but the wife." Verse 5, "Defraud ye not one the other, except it be with consent for a time, that ye may give yourselves to fasting and prayer, and come together again, that Satan tempt you not for your incontinency." Verse 6, "But I speak this by permission, and not of commandment." Verse 7, "For I would that all men were even as I myself, but every man hath his proper gift of God, one after this manner, and another after that." Verse 8, "I say therefore to the unmarried and widows, it is good for them if they abide even as I." Verse 9, "But if they cannot contain, let them marry, for it is better to marry than to burn." Verse 10, "And unto the married I command, yet not I, but the Lord. Let not the wife depart from her husband." 11, But if she depart, let her remain unmarried, or be reconciled to her husband. And let not the husband put away his wife." Verse 12, "But to the rest speak I, not the Lord. If any brother hath a wife that believeth not, and she be pleased to dwell with him, let him not put her away." Verse 13, "And the woman which hath a husband that believeth not, and if he be pleased to dwell with her, let her not leave him." Verse 14, "For the unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife, and the unbelieving wife is sanctified by the husband. Else were your children unclean, but now they are holy." Verse 15, "But if the unbelieving depart, let him depart. A brother or a sister is not under bondage in such cases, but God hath called us to peace." Verse 16, "For what knowest thou, O wife, another whether thou shalt save thy husband? Or howest thou, O man, whether thou shalt save thy wife?" Having just told his readers to flee from sexual sin, Paul's turning to the option of marriage. In previous correspondence, he had received questions about the subject. Obviously no surprise, since Greek cultures values distorted scriptural teachings on marriage at both ends of the scale. On one hand, dualism taught that the body and spirit were completely separate entities within a person. If nothing done to the body had a lasting spiritual effect, why not freely engage in hedonism? Another philosophy was asceticism, where one sought to purify his spirit by depriving his body of any pleasure, sexual or otherwise. Having already addressed hedonism, Paul turns his attention to the ascetics. So now if we go right back to verse 1 again, and we're going to go verse through verse for these and find out what Paul's really trying to tell us here. So verse 1 says, "Now concerning the things whereof ye wrote unto me, it is good for a man not to touch a woman." So now what he's trying to point out here is, because they wrote the matters to him, it's good for a man not to marry. And then in verse 2 he says, "Nevertheless, to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife, and let every woman have her own husband." And now he's saying, but since there is so much immortality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman should have her own husband. Verse 3 he says, "Let the husband render unto the wife due benevolence, and likewise also the wife unto the husband." The husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and the same for the wife to her husband. Verse 4, "The wife hath not power of her own body, but the husband, and likewise also the husband hath not power of his own body, but the wife." Now he's saying that the wife's body doesn't belong to her alone, but it also belongs to her husband. And in the same way, the husband's body doesn't just belong to himself, but it also belongs to his wife. And in verse 5 he says, defraud ye not one the other, except it be with consent for a time, that ye may give yourselves to fasting and prayer, and come together again, that Satan tempt you not for your incontinency. So now he's going on to say that don't deprive each other except by a mutual consent and for only a short time, so that ye may devote yourselves to prayer, but then come back together again, so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Verse 6 he says, but I speak this by permission and not of commandment. Now he's going on to say that I'm saying this as a concession, not as a command. Verse 7, for I would that all men were even as I myself, but every man have this proper gift of God, one after this manner and another after that. Now he's going on to say that he's wishing that all men were as himself, but each man has his own gift from God. One has one gift and another has another gift. Verse 8 he says, I say therefore to the unmarried and widows, it is good for them if they abide even as I. Now he's saying that he's, to the unmarried people and to the widows, he's saying that it's good for them to stay unmarried as himself, like as Paul is. Verse 10 he says, and unto the married I command, yet not I, but the Lord, let not the wife depart from her husband. Now he's saying to the married I'm giving this command, and it's not his command, but it's the Lord's command, that a wife must not separate from her husband. Verse 11, but if she depart, let her remain unmarried or be reconciled to her husband, and let not the husband put away his wife. Now he's going on to say, but if she does, she must remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband, and the husband must not divorce his wife. Verse 12 he's saying, but to the rest speak I, not the Lord. If any brother hath a wife that believeth not, and she be pleased to dwell with him, let him not put her away. Now he's going on to say to the rest, he's talking to them. And it's him, not the Lord. If any brother has a wife who is not a believer, and she's willing to believe with him, he's not supposed to divorce her. Verse 13 says, and the woman which hath a husband that believeth not, and if he be pleased to dwell with her, let her not leave unto him. He's saying the same thing for the woman with a husband. If her husband is willing to be a believer, do not leave them. And then in verse 14 he says, for the unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife, and the unbelieving wife is sanctified by the husband. Else were your children unclean, but now they are holy. Now he's going to point out that for the unbelieving husband has been sanctified through his wife, and the same for the wife being sanctified through her believing husband. Otherwise, their children would be unclean, but as it is now, they are holy. And verse 15 says, but if the unbelieving depart, let him depart. A brother or a sister is not under bondage in such cases, but God hath called us to peace. Now he's going on to say that if the unbeliever leaves, let him do so. A believing man or woman is not bound in such circumstances, and God has called us to live in peace. So now in verse 16 it says, for what knowest thou, O wife, whether thou shalt save thy husband? Or how knowest thou, O man, whether thou shalt save thy wife? With the rapid growth of the church, it's actually not surprising that guidelines were needed for when one spouse became a believer and the other doesn't. Paul says if the unbelieving spouse leaves, the believer is no longer bound to the marriage. But if the unbeliever is willing to continue in the marriage, the Christian is not to leave his or her spouse. The ungodly influence of one spouse on the other may result in the other's salvation. So verse 17 says, but as God hath distributed to every man, as the Lord hath called every one, so let him walk, and so ordain I in all churches. Now he's going on to say that each one should retain the place in life that the Lord assigned them to, and to which God has called them. And this is the rule he's laying down in all the churches. Verse 18 says, is any man called being circumcised? Let him not become uncircumcised. Is any called in uncircumcision? Let him not be circumcised. So now he's saying, was a man already circumcised when he was called? He should not become uncircumcised. And the same for a man that was uncircumcised when he was called. He should not become circumcised. Verse 19 says, circumcision is nothing, and uncircumcision is nothing, but the keeping of the commandments of God. Now he's going on to say that circumcision and uncircumcision are nothing. And keeping the God commandments, keeping God's commandments that he's given us is what really counts and what's really worth it. And in verse 20 it says, let every man abide in the same calling wherein he was called. So now he's just saying, let every man stay in the same calling that they were originally called to. Verse 21, art thou being called a servant? Care not for it, but if thou mayest be made free, use it rather. So now he's saying, were you originally called to be a servant? He's basically saying, don't worry about it. Although you can gain your freedom, if you can gain your freedom, do so. Verse 22 says, for that he that is called in the Lord, being a servant, is the Lord's freeman. Likewise also, he that is called, being free, is Christ's servant. So, now he's going on to say, for, he who was a slave was, when he was called by the Lord, is the Lord's freedman. And, basically, the same thing, he who is a freeman when he was called in Christ's slave. 23 says, ye are bought with a price. So sorry about that, folks. Ye are bought with a price, but ye not the servants of men. So now he's going on to say that, we were bought at a price and we do not become slaves of men. Then in verse 24 he basically goes on to say that each man is responsible to God, should remain in the situation God called him to. In the 24th, the verse is, brethren, let every man wherein he is called, therein abide with God. Becoming a Christian changes a person's spiritual life and outlook, but it doesn't mean a person will change in every way. Gentiles remain Gentile, servants remain servants, but really they're under no obligation to do so if they can obtain their freedom. Similarly, happily single people need not to rush out looking for a mate, and married believers need not pursue singleness. Instead, everyone should attempt to do whatever God is directing them to do. So now we're just going to read 25 to 29 here quickly, because this just is going to we're going to sum it up all at the end. So 25 says, now concerning virgins I have no commandment of the Lord, yet I give my judgment as one that hath obtained mercy of the Lord to be faithful. 26, I suppose therefore that this is good for the present distress. I say that it is good for a man so to be. 27, art thou bound unto a wife? Seek not to be loosed. Art thou loosed from a wife? Seek not a wife. Verse 28, and if thou marry, thou hast not sinned, and if a virgin marry, she hath not sinned. Nevertheless, such shall trouble have in the flesh, but I spare you. 29, but this I say, brethren, the time is short. It remaineth that body that they have wives be as though they had none. So Paul preferred the single life, but he's insisting it's not the only way for the people to be faithful to God. However, ministry was foremost on Paul's mind. His reminder that there is little time may be a reference to Jesus' return. In any case, Corinth was prosperous at the time, and believers there had not yet faced the persecution that would eventually come. So 30 says, and they that weep as though they wept not, and they that rejoice as though they rejoice not, and they that buy as though they possess not. So now what he's going on to say here is, the people that mourn, it's like they didn't, and the people who are happy, it's like they're not, and the people who buy, it's like it's not theirs to keep. 31, he goes on to say, and they that use this world, as not abusing it, for the fashion of this world passeth away. Now he's going on to say that the people who use the things of the world as if it's engrossed in them, because the world's in its present form is passing away. Verse 32 says, but I would have you without carefulness. He that is unmarried careth for the things that belong to the Lord, how he may please the Lord. Now he's going on to say that, that he would like them to be free from concern, and an unmarried man is concerned about the Lord's affairs. How can he please the Lord? And 33 says, but he that is married careth for the things that are of the world, how he may please his wife. Now he's going on to say that, the man that's married is concerned about the affairs of this world. How is he able to please his wife? 34 says, there is a difference also between a wife and a virgin. The unmarried woman careth for the things of the Lord, that she may be holy both in body and in spirit. But she that is married careth for the things of the world, how she may please her husband. So now he's going on to say, his interests are divided. An unmarried woman or a virgin is concerned about the Lord's affairs. Her aim is to be devoted to the Lord in both body and in spirit. But a woman who's married is more concerned about the affairs of this world. How is she able to please her husband? 35 says, "And this I speak for you, for your own profit, not that I may cast a snare upon you, but for that which is comely, and that ye may attend upon the Lord without distraction." You know, in verse 34, he was basically talking about how a single person is freer to serve God. Marriage is a commitment to another person, and such a commitment requires time and attention. People can serve God whether they are married or single, but God is not honored by the neglect of a spouse. So in verse 35, what he's kind of mentioning here is, he's saying this for their own good, not to restrict them, but that they may live in a right way in undivided devotion to the Lord. Verse 36 says, "But if a man think that he behaveth himself uncomely toward his virgin, if she pass the flower of her age, and needs to require, let him do that he will, he sinneth not, let them marry." Now he's going on to say that if he thinks he's acting improperly toward the virgin he is engaged to, and if she is getting along in years and he feels he ought to marry her, he should do what he wants. He's not sinning. They should get married. Verse 37, he's saying, "Nevertheless he that standeth steadfast in his heart, having no necessity, but hath power over his own will, and hath so decreed in his heart that he will keep his virgin, doeth well." Now he's going on to say that the man who has settled the matter in his own mind, the man's also under no compulsion, but has control over his own will, and he's made up his mind not to marry the virgin. This man also does the right thing. Verse 38 says, "So then he that giveth her in marriage doeth well, but he that giveth her not in marriage doeth better." Now he's saying that the man who marries the virgin is doing right, but the man who doesn't marry her is doing even better. 39 says, "The wife is bound by the law as long as her husband liveth, but if her husband be dead, she is at liberty to be married to whom she will, only in the Lord." Now he's going on to say that a woman is bound to her husband as long as he lives, but if her husband dies, she's free to marry anyone she wishes, but he must belong to the Lord. And finally, in verse 40, he's saying, "But she is happier if she so abide, after my judgment, and I think also that I have the Spirit of God." In my judgment, she is happier if she stays as she is, and he's thinking that he too has the Spirit of God. So folks, that ends today's session of 1 Corinthians, chapter 7. I'm so sorry, I'm so stuck on our Romans that I feel that we're still in Romans, but we're in 1 Corinthians now, continuing on the path of the Corinthians. And our next chapter is going to be chapter 8. It's going to be fairly short, so we're going to have a longer session today, and then there will be another shorter one to bring it down. And folks, I sincerely thank you for tuning in again. And I hope that you enjoy the talks that I give you, that they bless you in some way or another. And I hope that you make it an amazing day today. Thanks for tuning in, and this is Brandon Med saying our email is always open, dailybiblecanada@gmail.com.